Well, I mean, I think you always have sort of a hankering for it, or an idea that maybe you want to do it. I would suppose it was high school. Somewhere secreted in my heart, I wanted to write something that I thought other people would want to read someday. Now, of course, my first love was poetry. That's what I studied as an undergraduate, and so I was writing bad poetry throughout all of my undergraduate days. I wasn't necessarily writing that much when I was in the Army. I was tinkering with things from time to time. I would kind of come up with what I would call travel logs. Maybe with a close group of friends, I would sort of capture stories about travels to different places. South Africa, Korea, Ireland, but I wasn't really writing in earnest until I got out. And then I tried really hard and wasn't doing so hot, particularly in fiction. When I was a graduate student and I was really trying to write fiction, I understood very quickly that I would be lying to myself if I didn't think that I was interested in fiction. It's what I've been primarily reading as an adult. I'd sort of, in college, even though I was focused on poetry, I'd been introduced to my gateway drugs, Hemingway being the biggest of them. And in particular, not, the novels that people remember him for now, or even his really great early novels. What captured me was his story collection. It was actually his second book published, but it's the first book that he would take credit for having published. The first book that he published, he wrote this really scathing short novel that parodied Sherwood Anderson, and it was very ungenerous, but he did it to get essentially out of a contract. And he never took credit for it. He was just sort of shoved to the pile of history. And the first book that we remember him for was this collection of short stories called In Our Time, published about 1925. And it's remarkable. And that really got me to pay attention to what you could do in prose, and that it wasn't completely what was there in the line. It was that he made me feel what wasn't there, what was left unsaid, the silences. And that was exciting to me, very exciting. And, I just started to read voraciously. I had read voraciously all through my time in the Army, and I knew that I'd be lying to myself if I didn't want to try it. So I tried my first workshop, my first quarter, at the University of Chicago, and I wasn't good at it at all. But, I knew that I had a lot to say, and I had some very generous workshop leaders and teachers, and, they were excited about me working with the material. So eventually you do find your way in those programs. And I would say at the time, the University of Chicago didn't have many folks on their faculty who did a lot with fiction. Their strongest faculty, in my opinion, during the time that I was there, it's not true necessarily now, but they were the narrative nonfiction writers. I have one teacher in particular, a guy named Dan Rayburn. He wrote a memoir called Vessels. The genesis of that piece was an essay that he wrote that ended up in the New Yorker about the stillborn death of his daughter. And it's incredibly powerful, but he was a wonderful teacher and very alive to everything that I think. He was more exacting about the craft, about paying attention to one's sentences, about learning rhythm than anybody I had. And he made me think a lot about the theory of what those narratives were trying to accomplish and how we best go about capturing thought and emotion in narrative.